The moment the con man discovered he'd been targeting his own biological mother, he realized he wasn't the predator in this game, but the prey. 20 years of running sophisticated scams had prepared him for everything except coming face to face with the woman who'd given him away, now dying and holding secrets that could destroy them both. The fake gold watch on his wrist struck exactly 3 o'clock when he crossed the gates of the colonial mansion. His Italian leather shoes echoed on the stone path, each step as calculated as the lies he'd crafted over the past 20 years. The immaculate garden exhaled the scent of white roses, the favorites of his latest mark. Helena Mendez, 68, widow of construction magnate Ricardo Mendez, estimated fortune of $45 million. The butler, a gentleman of impeccable posture, led him through an entrance hall adorned with paintings he immediately identified as originals. His trained eyes cataloged every valuable item while pretending to admire the architecture. An authentic Tiffany lamp illuminated the main staircase, its crystals casting hypnotic patterns on the Italian marble floor. "Madam awaits you in the Winter Garden," announced the butler, his neutral voice carrying an almost imperceptible note of distrust. He adjusted his silk tie, also fake, and followed the corridor. The aroma of jasmine tea floated in the air, mixing with the perfume of orchids decorating the space. Helena sat in a Victorian armchair, a delicate figure framed by light streaming through the glass ceiling. Something about that scene made his heart skip a beat, a strange sensation he quickly suppressed. "Mr. Martinez, I presume," she smiled, extending a delicate hand adorned with a single platinum ring. "Please, sit down, Mrs. Mendez. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," he responded, his voice modulated to convey exactly the right amount of respect and cordiality. The Spanish accent, carefully cultivated, completed his current character. Carlos Martinez, international financial consultant specializing in high-risk investments. The Winter Garden was an architectural masterpiece, with glass walls revealing the external gardens and creating an atmosphere of perpetual spring. Rare plants occupied each strategic corner, their exotic foliage providing privacy without sacrificing luminosity. "Would you care for some tea?" she offered, her blue eyes studying him with disconcerting intensity. "It's a special blend I ordered directly from Japan." He nodded, watching as she poured the amber liquid into delicate Chinese porcelain cups. Her movements were precise, almost choreographed, as if each gesture was part of a larger ritual. "I must confess I was intrigued by your proposal," Helena commented, her voice carrying a tone he couldn't quite decipher. "It's not every day I receive such peculiar investment offers." The plan was simple: gain her trust, suggest increasingly risky investments, and eventually transfer a substantial amount to phantom accounts overseas. It had worked dozens of times before, with equally sophisticated targets. But something about this woman, perhaps the way her eyes seemed to see through him, left him unsettled. The next 2 hours passed in a familiar dance of half-truths and impressive numbers. He presented masterfully forged documents, spoke about non-existent international connections, and painted a picture of golden opportunities that would make any experienced investor salivate. "It's an interesting proposal," Helena remarked, fingering the rim of her teacup. "But you know what fascinates me more? How someone with your talents chooses to use them this way." The statement caught him off guard, but years of experience prevented him from showing any reaction. "Pardon me, Mrs. Mendez. I'm not sure I understand." "Oh, I'm quite certain you understand perfectly." She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But don't worry. For now, let's maintain this interesting dance we've begun." At that moment, a dry cough interrupted her, quickly transforming into a fit that made her double over. He rose instinctively, genuine concern breaking through his carefully constructed defenses. "Mrs. Mendez, are you all right? Do you need help?" She waved negatively, regaining her composure with visible effort. When she straightened up, there was a pallor to her face that hadn't been there before. "I'm fine. Just a small inconvenience that's become more frequent." The butler materialized silently beside her, offering a glass of water and a concerned look. Helena dismissed him with a gentle gesture, but not before he cast a penetrating glance in the visitor's direction. Perhaps we should continue this conversation another time, he suggested, his mind already calculating the next move. That won't be necessary, she replied, her voice regaining its firmness. In fact, I'd like you to return tomorrow. I have some documents I'd like to discuss in more detail. As he left the mansion under a sky beginning to tinge with the orange hues of twilight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed that afternoon. The weight of the fake watch on his wrist felt heavier, as if it were counting more than just hours. The growing darkness seemed to mirror his unease as he made his way to his car. For the first time in years, the familiar rhythm of a con in progress felt off-key, like a well-rehearsed orchestra suddenly playing in the wrong tempo. Her eyes. There was something about her eyes that nagged at his memory, something he couldn't quite place. The morning light cast long shadows across his hotel room as he meticulously reviewed Helena Mendes' file. 20 years of running cons had taught him the importance of details, but something about this mark made him double and triple check every piece of information. Spread across the mahogany desk, newspaper clippings and financial reports painted a picture of wealth and isolation, the perfect combination for someone in his line of work. Ricardo Mendes' death leaves empire to reclusive widow, read one headline from 3 years ago. He traced the words with his finger, studying the grainy photograph of Helena at the funeral. She stood alone, her face partially hidden behind a black veil, but her posture spoke of steel rather than grief. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, his tech guy. Background check complete. Nothing unusual except medical records show frequent hospital visits last 6 months. Terminal diagnosis? The news should have excited him. Desperate marks made easier targets, but instead, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. He pushed aside the feeling, focusing on the next phase of his plan. The Rolex knockoff on his wrist ticked steadily as he began preparing the next set of forged documents. A memory surfaced unbidden, his foster mother's face when she told him he was special. He'd learned early that special was adult code for unwanted. Each new home had reinforced the lesson until he turned it into an advantage. People who expected betrayal were easy to fool. It was those who trusted who truly surprised you. The drive to Helena's mansion felt different in the morning light. The garden seemed more vibrant, the white roses more numerous than he'd noticed yesterday. The butler, Thompson, he'd learned, greeted him with the same barely concealed suspicion, but today led him to a different room. Helena's private study was a testament to a life well lived. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines speaking of careful curation rather than mere collection. Family photos dotted the shelves, but he noticed they all seemed to date from the same period, as if time had stopped somewhere in the past. Examining my life's collection? Helena's voice came from behind him, stronger than yesterday despite her illness. Books tell more about a person than any conversation could. He turned to find her watching him with that same penetrating gaze. Today she wore a simple blue dress that somehow made her eyes even more striking. "You have excellent taste in literature," he replied, noting a first edition Hemingway among the volumes. "And you have an excellent eye for value," she smiled, settling into a leather armchair. "Please, sit. I believe we have much to discuss." The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between them like silent witnesses. He took the seat across from her, noting how she positioned herself so the light fell across his face while leaving hers in partial shadow. "Before we continue our discussion about investments," she began, "I'd like to tell you a story." Her fingers traced patterns on the armrest, a gesture that seemed both deliberate and unconscious. "It's about choices, primarily. The kinds of choices that shape not just one life, but many." He maintained his professional smile, but something in her tone set off warning bells. In 2 decades of cons, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Right now, they were screaming at him to run. 28 years ago, she continued, "I made a choice that has haunted me every day since." It was, perhaps, the most difficult decision any mother could make. The word mother hit him like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. His hand moved unconsciously to touch the distinctive birthmark. Hidden beneath his collar, a mark that had been one of the few constants in his life of changing identities. "Mrs. Mendez," he interrupted smoothly, "while I'm sure your story is fascinating, perhaps we should focus on the investment opportunity I presented yesterday." "Patience?" "Mr. Martinez, if that is indeed your name," she replied, reaching for a folder on the side table. "Some investments require a fuller understanding of their history." She opened the folder and removed a photograph, studying it before passing it to him. It showed a newborn baby, small and red-faced, with a distinctive mark on its neck, identical to his own. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Years of training kept his hand steady as he examined the photograph, but his mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. "An interesting coincidence," he managed, his accent slipping slightly. "There are no coincidences in our line of work, are there?" Helene's voice had grown softer, almost gentle. "Though I suppose in your case, it's more accurate to say your line of work. The con artist's creed. Everything happens for a reason. Every mark is chosen deliberately." The morning sun suddenly felt too bright, too revealing. He fought the urge to loosen his collar, to touch the birthmark that now seemed to burn against his skin. "I've known who you were since before you walked through my door," she continued. "The question is, do you know who you are?" The silence that followed her question stretched between them like a taut wire. Through the window, a gardener methodically trimmed the white roses, each snip of his shears marking time in the frozen moment. He'd been in tight situations before, had faced marks who discovered his deceptions, but this was different. This felt like standing on the edge of a precipice he'd been avoiding his entire life. "I know exactly who I am," he replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I'm someone who's very good at reading people and situations. Right now, I'm reading a sophisticated attempt at manipulation." Helena's laugh was soft and sad, like wind through autumn leaves. "Of course you'd see it that way. When you've spent your life creating illusions, everything looks like a trick of light." She pulled another document from the folder, a birth certificate. His birth certificate, he realized with a jolt, though he'd never seen it before. "Michael," she said the name softly, testing it. "That's what I named you, Michael Thomas Mendez." The name hit him like a physical blow. He'd used dozens of names over the years. Carlos Martinez was just the latest. But hearing this one stirred something deep and forgotten. A memory surfaced, a foster mother calling him Michael before the paperwork came through to change it. He'd been 4, maybe 5. "This is an elaborate play," he said, professional instincts kicking in. "You've done your research. I'll give you that. The birthmark could be coincidence. Documents can be forged. I should know." He smiled, all teeth and warning. "Yes, you would know about forgeries," Helena agreed, pulling out more papers. "Just as you'd know about the importance of details, like the fact that your birthmark is actually a rare genetic pattern that appears in my family line, or that your blood type matches both mine and Ricardo's exactly." The gardener outside had moved to a new section of roses, his methodical work continuing unaware of the drama unfolding inside. He found himself focusing on the man's movements, anything to avoid the weight of Helena's gaze. Why now? The question escaped before he could stop it. "If what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying it is, why wait until I came to con you? Why not find me sooner?" Helena's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress. "Because I made a promise to Ricardo. He believed it would be better for you to have a clean start, away from the complications of our world. We set up a trust, arranged the adoption through proper channels. You were supposed to have a normal life." A bitter laugh escaped him. "A normal life? Foster homes, group homes, juvenile detention. That's what you call a clean start. The family we chose." Helena's voice caught. "There was a car accident 6 months after the adoption. We didn't know until years later. By then, you disappeared into the system. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Every con relied on understanding human nature, on reading the subtle tells that revealed truth from fiction." Everything about Helena's story rang true, from the slight catch in her voice to the way her fingers kept returning to that platinum ring. "The cancer," he said suddenly, connecting another dot. "That's why now. You're dying." She nodded, a single graceful movement. 6 months, maybe less. When my private investigator told me about a sophisticated con man working high-end marks in South America, one with a distinctive birthmark, she smiled sadly. Let's just say I decided it was time to break my promise to Ricardo. Outside, the gardener had finished with the roses. The morning sun now fell directly across the space between them, illuminating the particles of dust that danced in the air like memories trying to take shape. I need you to understand something, Helena continued, her voice gaining strength. I'm not telling you this to manipulate you or to stop whatever scheme you've planned. I'm telling you because… She paused, gathering herself. Because every mother should have the chance to tell her child why you gave them away. The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. Why we make the choices we make, even when they break our hearts. She stood slowly, moving to a cabinet in the corner. Ricardo was being threatened by business rivals. There had already been one attempt on his life. When I became pregnant, she withdrew a small box. We thought we were protecting you. His training screamed at him to leave, to walk away from this potential trap. But something stronger kept him rooted to the spot as Helena returned to her seat. I've watched you since you arrived yesterday, she said, opening the box. You have Ricardo's way of analyzing everything, categorizing threats. And you have my tells, the way you tilt your head when you're processing new information, how your left hand moves when you're uncomfortable. Inside the box was a silver pocket watch, its surface etched with intricate patterns. Ricardo carried this everywhere. He meant for you to have it someday. He stared at the pocket watch, its silver surface catching the morning light. Unlike his fake Rolex, this piece radiated authenticity, not just in its craftsmanship, but in the subtle wear patterns that spoke of years of actual use. Years when it had been carried by a man he should have known as father. I don't need family heirlooms, he said, but made no move to leave. I've built my life on my own terms. Whatever guilt you're carrying, whatever redemption you're seeking, I'm not your answer. Helena placed the watch on the table between them. You're right, you're not my answer. You're my question. She leaned forward, her illness momentarily forgotten in the intensity of her focus. Every time I look at you, I see all my questions about what might have been. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thompson entered with a tea service, his movements precise and practiced. The familiar ritual of pouring tea provided a momentary respite from the weight of revelations. You mentioned business rivals, he said after Thompson had left, his mind working through the implications. The Cardoso family? Helena's eyebrows rose slightly. You've done your research. It's my job to know the players in any potential investment opportunity. He picked up his teacup, using the moment to study her reaction. The Cardosos lost everything in 1996. Right around the time Ricardo Mendez expanded his empire significantly. Ricardo was brutal in business. Helena acknowledged, but everything he did was to protect what he loved. She paused, watching him over the rim of her cup, including giving up his only child. The tea was the same Japanese blend as yesterday, but today he noticed subtle notes he'd missed before. Like this conversation, it revealed new layers with each moment. The Cardosos didn't just lose their business. He continued, falling back on familiar ground. Information, leverage, control. Their patriarch committed suicide. His wife died of grief within a year. The children disappeared. You've been tracking them. It wasn't a question. He'd spent years following the threads of power in South America's business world, learning the players, understanding the old grudges and alliances. The Cardoso story had always fascinated him, though he'd never understood why until now. They're still out there, he said. The youngest son runs a legitimate business in Chile. The daughter, he hesitated. She's harder to track. Maria. Elena's voice carried a weight of history. She blamed Ricardo the most. She was only 16 when her father died. A memory stirred. A newspaper photograph of a teenage girl at a funeral, her face twisted with grief and rage. He'd kept that clipping, though he'd never examined why. She's why you're really here, isn't she? Elena's question cut through his thoughts. Not just for a con, but for information about the past. He stood abruptly, needing to move. The study suddenly felt too small, too confined. I'm here because you're a mark. A wealthy widow with more money than sense. eager for high-return investments. The words sounded hollow even to him. Then, why research the Cardosos? Why spend years tracking a fallen family's movements? Elena's voice followed him as he paced. You could have run 100 simpler cons in that time. She was right, of course. Every successful con artist knew to keep things simple, to avoid unnecessary complications. But he'd been drawn to this world of old money and older grudges, spending years building his reputation in South American business circles, all leading to this moment. What happened to Maria Cardoso? He asked finally, stopping at the window. The garden was empty now, the freshly trimmed roses standing like sentinels. She disappeared after her mother's death. There were rumors. Alana paused, choosing her words carefully. Rumors that she'd joined certain organizations dedicated to bringing down what she saw as corrupt business empires. Terrorist groups, he translated. Among other things, Helena set down her teacup with a final sounding clink. Last year, there was chatter that she'd resurfaced, that she was planning something. It's why I hired the investigator who found you. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. You think she's coming for you. I think she never stopped planning her revenge. And now that Ricardo's gone, Elena's voice trailed off into a cough, this one deeper than yesterday's. When she recovered, her face was pale but determined. I'm dying, Michael. I can't fight whatever she's planning, but I couldn't leave this world without warning you. Warning me? He turned from the window, studying her face with new intensity. Or recruiting me. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Helena's features, highlighting the illness that lurked beneath her composed exterior. I'm warning you because you have Ricardo's blood in Maria's eyes. That makes you a target, whether you acknowledge the connection or not. He moved back to his seat, his mind racing through scenarios and implications. The con artist in him saw opportunities, information to be leveraged, secrets to be sold. But something deeper, something he'd spent years burying, saw the threads of fate pulling tight. Tell me about the trust you mentioned, he said, shifting to practical matters. The one you set up when you gave me away. Helena reached for another folder, this one thicker than the others. Ricardo insisted on creating a safety net, even though we'd agreed to cut all ties. 20 million in offshore accounts, properties in 3 countries, and a network of loyal people who could help if needed. Help that never came. He couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Because we didn't know you needed it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. By the time we learned about the accident, you'd vanished. Every investigator we hired hit dead ends. It was like you'd learned to disappear before you could even drive. He smiled grimly. Survival skill. The foster system teaches you how to be invisible, a skill that had served him well in his chosen profession. Helena spread several documents on the table between them. Bank statements, property deeds, corporate registrations, all bearing dates from more than 2 decades ago. All legitimate, he noted with professional appreciation. Everything is still there, she said quietly. Untouched, growing. Ricardo updated the trust every year until his death, adding new assets, creating new safe houses. Safe houses you think I'll need because of Maria Cardoso. Safe houses you'll need because of who you are. Alana's voice carried an urgency now. The Mendez name still carries weight in certain circles. Power and responsibility. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Responsibility? I'm a con artist. I make my living stealing from people like you. No. Helena leaned forward, her eyes intense. You make your living understanding people like us. Reading situations, analyzing patterns, seeing the bigger picture. Just like Ricardo did, a memory surfaced. His first successful con, age 17. He'd instinctively known which buttons to push, which weaknesses to exploit. He'd attributed it to street smarts, to years of watching people in the foster system. But maybe the investigator's reports, Helena continued, pulling out more papers. Every con you've run has targeted corrupt businessmen, exploitative corporations. You've never stolen from anyone who couldn't afford to lose the money. And most interestingly, she paused, shuffling through the papers. A significant portion of your takings end up anonymously donated to children's charities. He kept his face neutral, but internally he cursed. He'd thought those donations were untraceable. That's what convinced me, she said softly. Not the birthmark, not the DNA test results. Those numbers, the exact percentage Ricardo used to donate to similar causes. 27%. The precision of the number hit him like a physical blow. 27% of every con donated to foster care organizations and children's homes. He'd never questioned why that specific number felt right. Maria isn't just planning revenge, Helena continued, her voice growing urgent. She's planning to destroy everything Ricardo built. Not just the business empire, but the foundations, the charitable trusts, the social programs. She wants to erase his legacy completely. And you think I care about preserving the legacy of a man I never knew? I think you already are preserving it in your own way. She gestured at the documents spread between them. Every donation, every corrupt businessman exposed, every power structure questioned. You're your father's son, whether you want to be or not. The weight of her words hung in the air, mixing with the dust motes that still danced in the sunbeams. Outside, clouds had begun to gather, throwing shadows across the carefully tended gardens. There's more, Helena said, reaching for another folder. Information about Maria's current activities, network connections, financial trails, everything our investigators have gathered. He started to refuse, to stand up and walk away from this complicated web of past and present. But his hands reached for the folder anyway, professional instincts warring with something deeper. I'm not doing this for you, he said firmly, or for Ricardo's legacy. Helena smiled, sad and knowing. No, you'll do it because it's who you are. Because you can't walk away from a puzzle once you've seen all the pieces. The afternoon sun had begun its descent when Thompson reappeared, carrying a silver tray with sandwiches and fresh tea. The butler's eyes lingered on the documents spread across the table, his carefully neutral expression betraying nothing. Yet there was something in the way he positioned himself between Helena and her visitor. Protective, almost paternal. Thompson has been with us since before you were born, Helena said after he left. He was one of the few who knew about you, who helped arrange everything. Another keeper of secrets, he mused, scanning through Maria Cardoso's file. The photograph showed a woman transformed by decades of hatred, her father's dark eyes now harder, colder, set in a face that had learned to wear many masks, much like his own. What's her endgame? He asked, professional instincts taking over. Destroying Ricardo's legacy is one thing, but she's invested too much time, too many resources for this to be simple revenge. Helena's fingers traced the edge of a document, a banking statement showing mysterious fund transfers. We believe she's built a network within the legitimate business world, people who lost to Ricardo over the years, who harbor their own grudges. She's offering them a chance at revenge, but more importantly, she's offering them power, he finished. The vacuum created by destroying the Mendez Empire would create opportunities, massive ones. Yes, Helena's cough returned, stronger this time. Thompson materialized with water and medication, hovering until she waved him away. But it's more than that. She wants to expose everything, every deal, every compromise, every shadow Ricardo ever cast. He leaned back, connecting dots, including me, a secret son given away who became a criminal. It would taint everything Ricardo built, suggest he was as corrupt in private as his enemies claimed he was in business. You understand. Then, it wasn't a question. I understand strategy, he corrected. It's what I do, but understanding doesn't mean I'm getting involved. Helena smiled faintly. You're already involved. I've been since you first started researching the Cardoso family. The only question is whether you'll face it on your terms or hers. He stood, needing to move again, to think. The study's walls of books suddenly seemed relevant. Generations of knowledge, of power, of responsibility bound in leather and paper. His eyes caught titles he recognized. Volumes on business strategy, on military history, on the art of negotiation. Books that had shaped his own education, though he'd read them in library corners and borrowed copies. The trust, he said finally. Show me everything. For the next hour, Helena walked him through the complex web of accounts, properties, and connections Ricardo had built. It was impressive, not just the resources, but the forethought. Safe houses equipped with everything from fake passports to emergency funds. Business connections in countries without extradition treaties. A network of loyal people placed in key positions. He'd prepared for every contingency, Helena explained, except the one that happened, losing you to something as mundane as bureaucracy and bad luck. He examined a property deed for a villa in southern Spain. These loyal people, how many are still active? Most have retired or moved on. Thompson maintains contact with key individuals. She hesitated. And there's someone else you should know about. Someone who's been watching over you, in a way, for years. His head snapped up. What do you mean? Ricardo had a protege. Someone he trusted completely. After we lost track of you, this person kept looking quietly, making sure certain doors remained open, certain opportunities appeared when needed. The implications hit him like a wave. My first big con. The banker in São Paulo who practically handed me the information I needed. The security guard in Buenos Aires who looked the other way. The mysterious tip about the corrupt hedge fund manager in Lima. Helena nodded. Alexandra Ruiz. She was like a daughter to Ricardo, and she's been your guardian angel, in a way, though she never made direct contact. Where is she now? Running our legitimate operations in Europe. And Helena paused, reaching for another file. Gathering intelligence on Maria's network. She's the one who warned us about increased activity, about Maria possibly discovering your existence. The pieces were falling into faster now, forming a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. Every con he'd run, every mark he'd chosen, had they really been his choices? Or had he been guided, protected, directed towards certain targets and away from others? I need to meet her, he said finally. Alexandra. She's arriving tomorrow. Helena's voice had grown weaker, the day's exertions taking their toll. There's so much more you need to know. So many pieces still to connect. Thompson appeared at the door, concern evident in his stance. Madam should rest now. He gathered the files, mind already racing through implications and possibilities. I'll return in the morning. Michael, Helena called as he reached the door. Whatever you decide. Know that watching you these past 2 days has given me something I never thought I'd have. A chance to see the man you've become. The night air carried the scent of roses as he left the mansion. Files tucked securely in his briefcase. His hotel room suddenly seemed inadequate, too exposed, too obvious. Years of instinct had taught him when a situation was shifting from complex to dangerous. This had shifted somewhere around noon. He drove aimlessly through the city's winding streets, mind processing the day's revelations. Every con artist knew the importance of maintaining emotional distance, of never letting a Mark's story affect you personally. He'd broken that rule spectacularly. His phone buzzed. Marcus again. Got something weird. Multiple searches on your known aliases from various IP addresses. Started about 3 hours ago. Professional job, trying to look random. Burn everything, he replied without hesitation. All accounts, all identities, especially Carlos Martinez. Already done. But there's more. Someone's been backtracking your movements for months. They're good. Would have missed it if I wasn't specifically looking. Maria Cardoso. She'd been closing in, probably waiting for him to lead her to Helena. The perfect symmetry of it was almost admirable, using the lost son to destroy the dying mother. He switched cars twice, using techniques perfected over years of evading detection. The second vehicle, a nondescript sedan with diplomatic plates, brought him to a small apartment building in the old quarter, the kind of place tourists never noticed and locals ignored. Inside, he activated layers of security that would have impressed government agencies. Screens came to life, showing surveillance feeds from multiple angles. Everything clear, for now. The files from Helena spread across his desk told a story larger than he'd imagined. Ricardo Mendez hadn't just built a business empire. He created a shadow network of influence and information. And Maria Cardoso had spent decades infiltrating it, turning old allies into hidden enemies. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He let it ring twice before answering. The roses are lovely this time of year. A woman's voice, cultured, with a hint of Spanish accent. Alexandra Ruiz, I presume? We need to meet. Now. She didn't wait for his response. There's a cafe 3 blocks south of your current location. Come alone. You have 15 minutes. The line went dead. He stared at the phone, wondering how she knew his location, then smiled grimly. Of course, she knew. She'd been watching him for years. The cafe was exactly where she said, a small, dimly lit establishment that had seen better decades. Perfect for clandestine meetings. He spotted her immediately, though he'd never seen her photo. Something in the way she held herself, the calculated casualness of her position facing both the entrance and the emergency exit. You have his eyes, she said as he sat down. Ricardo's. The way they missed nothing. Alexandra Ruiz was elegant in an understated way. Her age impossible to determine. She could have been 40 or 60, her smooth features giving away nothing. How long have you been manipulating my life? He kept his voice neutral, professional. Manipulating implies control. She sipped her espresso. I merely suggested possibilities, opened certain doors, closed others that would have led to unfortunate ends. The Bolivian arms dealer would have killed you. He'd done it before. She set down her cup. The Swiss banker would have led me to an Interpol trap, he finished. I always wondered why that tip felt wrong. You have good instincts. Like your father. She reached into her bag, withdrew a thin file, but we don't have time for reminiscence. Maria Cardoso made her move 3 hours ago. He leaned forward. The search is on my aliases. That was just confirmation. She's already inside the Mendes organization. Has been for months. Alexandra's voice carried an edge of anger. At herself, he realized. We thought we had more time. That Helena's illness would kill her before Maria could strike? The pieces clicked. That's why Helena reached out now. She's not just dying. She's being killed. Alexandra's silence was answer enough. The cancer is real, she said finally, but its progression has been accelerated. Small doses of radiation, carefully timed exposures. Merely impossible to detect unless you know what to look for. And you found out too late. We found out yesterday, which is why I'm here a day early. She pushed the file across the table. Maria doesn't just want to destroy Ricardo's legacy. She wants to corrupt it completely. Turn everything he built into a weapon against the very people he tried to protect. He opened the file. The first page showed familiar faces. Business leaders, politicians, judges. All people who'd benefited from Ricardo's influence over the years. She's going to expose them all, Alexandra continued. But not just expose, destroy. She has evidence of their darkest secrets, their hidden crimes. Real or manufactured, it doesn't matter. The evidence will be convincing enough, creating a power vacuum that her network can fill. He nodded, while appearing to be a crusader against corruption. Exactly. And your existence, the abandoned son turned criminal, will be the cherry on top. Proof that Raquel Mendes was exactly the monster her father always claimed he was. The cafe's dim lighting seemed to grow darker as the implications settled in. Outside, the city's nightlife was beginning to stir, oblivious to the machinations that could reshape its power structures. You haven't asked the obvious question, Alexandra said, ordering a second espresso with a subtle gesture. Why did Ricardo really give you up? Helena said it was to protect me from business rival. Partial truth. Alexandra's eyes met his, sharp and evaluated. The Cardosos were just one faction. Ricardo had built something larger than an empire. He'd created a system of checks and balances in South American business. Every major player held in check by mutual assured destruction. Mutually compromising information, he translated. The kind that keeps everyone honest, or at least predictably dishonest. Exactly. But that system needed a keeper. Someone incorruptible. Someone who could maintain the balance without succumbing to the temptations of power. She paused as the waiter delivered her coffee. Ricardo was grooming you for that role. He sat back, processing. I was an infant. You were a symbol. The heir apparent, being raised to take over not just the business, but the whole system of influence. Her voice carried a weight of history. Then came the first attempt on your life. What? Your nursery. A gas leak that wasn't a leak. You survived by pure luck. Thompson had taken you to another room moments before. Alexandra's fingers tapped the table rhythmically. Ricardo realized that as long as you were publicly his son, you'd be a target, not just from enemies, but from all eyes afraid of how you might one day use their secrets. The pieces shifted, forming a new pattern. So he gave me up, made me disappear, while ensuring you develop exactly the skills you'd need. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. The trust wasn't just money. It was a training program. Every safe house equipped with specific books. Every loyal contact placed to teach particular lessons. Even your time in the foster system was meant to teach me about human nature. He finished, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. To understand desperation, manipulation, survival, Ricardo believed that to maintain balance, you needed to understand both sides of power, the high and the low, the legitimate and the shadow. She pushed her empty cup aside. What he didn't anticipate was losing track of you. When that happened, the plan had to adapt. So you watched, waited, nudged me towards certain opportunities. And now we're out of time. Alexandra leaned forward, her voice dropping lower. Maria plans to release everything tomorrow night. A data dump that will bring down governments, expose decades of secrets, destroy thousands of lives. Why tomorrow? The annual Mendes Foundation Gala. Every major player in South American business and politics will be there. Helena's last public appearance, supposedly. Her eyes narrowed. The perfect stage for Maria's revenge. He processed this, mind already running through scenarios. She'd be there, of course. She wants to see it all burn personally. Alexandra withdrew another file from her bag. We've identified most of her network, but she has fail-safes. If anything happens to her, if she's arrested or killed, the information releases automatically, unless someone could stop the release. He was thinking out loud now, professional instincts engaging. Someone who understands both sides of the system, who can play in both worlds. Now you're thinking like Ricardo's son. Alexandra's approval was evident. But there's a complication. Maria knows about you now. She'd be expecting some kind of intervention. Good. He stood. Decision made. That's exactly what we'll give her. Just not the kind she's expecting. What are you planning? A con. He smiled. And for the first time, he felt something of Ricardo in his expression. But not just any con. The kind that only works when the mark knows they're being conned. Alexandra's eyes widened slightly. The Spanish reversal, with elements of the Stockholm switch. He nodded. But we'll need help. Is Thompson still active in the network? He never left it. The butler role is just his cover. Perfect. Contact him. We have less than 24 hours to set this up. He gathered the files. And Alexandra? Thank you for watching over me all these years. Don't thank me yet, she replied, standing. Tomorrow we'll either restore Ricardo's legacy or destroy it completely. And you're the only one who can decide which. He stepped into the night air, mind already racing through preparations. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running a con to profit or survive. He was running it to protect something larger than himself. A system of balance that, for all its flaws, kept worse powers in check. The Mendes Foundation Gala gleamed like a jewel in the heart of the city, its Baroque architecture illuminated against the evening sky. He adjusted his perfectly tailored tuxedo, genuine this time, and watched the arrivals from his position on the grand balcony. Every face a player in this elaborate game. The most didn't know their true roles yet. Security positions confirmed. Thompson's voice came through his nearly invisible earpiece. Alexandra has eyes on all exits. Maria arrived 10 minutes ago, and Helena making her entrance in 5 minutes. Everything is prepared. He spotted Maria easily among the crowd below. She wore red, a bold choice that made her stand out among the more conservatively dressed elite. Her dark eyes scanned the room constantly, a predator assessing her prey. She looked nothing like the grieving teenage girl from that old photograph, but he recognized the intensity of her purpose. She's armed. Alexandra's voice joined the conversation. Micropistol, thigh holster, and her security team is spread throughout the crowd. I count 6. Expected, he replied softly. Is the package in place? Exactly where she find it. Marcus confirms the digital trail is laid. He smiled. The first phase of the con was simple. Let Maria think she'd discovered their countermove. The false data cache, the apparent attempt to substitute her evidence with manipulated files. She'd expect something like that. A murmur went through the crowd, as Helena made her entrance. She looked frail but elegant in midnight blue, supported by Thompson's steady arm. The illness, natural or accelerated, had taken its toll, but she carried herself with dignity. "Maria's watching her," Alexandra reported. "And now she's seen you." He felt Maria's gaze lock onto him. The prodigal son returned at last. He gave no sign of noticing her attention, instead making his way toward Helena through the crowd. "Mother," he said clearly, pitching his voice to carry just far enough. The ripple of whispers that followed was exactly as predicted. The lost Mendes heir, revealing himself at last. Helena played her part perfectly, her surprise and emotion genuine enough to convince even the most skeptical observers. "Michael," she breathed, touching his face with trembling fingers. The orchestra began a waltz, providing cover for quiet conversations throughout the ballroom. He led Helena to a quiet corner, aware of Maria tracking their every move. "She make her move soon," he murmured. "Are you ready?" Helena's grip on his arm tightened slightly. "I've been ready for this moment for 28 years. The next hour passed in a carefully choreographed dance. He circulated through the crowd, playing the role of the prodigal son while observing Maria's positioning. Her team was good. Professional mercenaries disguised as waiters and security, strategically placed to control key points. "She's accessed the package," Marcus reported through the earpiece, detecting multiple attempts to verify the data. "She's not buying it." "Good," he smiled, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "Time for phase 2. He made his way to the balcony, ostensibly for air. Right on cue, Maria followed. "Subtle," he commented without turning. "But then, subtlety isn't really your style, is it, Miss Cardoso?" "Neither is yours, apparently." She moved to stand beside him, her red dress catching the evening breeze. The prodigal son returns just in time to save his mother's legacy. How convenient. "We both know there's nothing convenient about any of this." He turned to face her. "Your father killed himself because he was weak. Ricardo Mendes didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself by trying to compete in a game he didn't understand." The flash of rage in her eyes was genuine. "You know nothing about my father. I know everything about him, just as I know everything about you." He smiled, Ricardo's smile, "including what you really want, and it's not revenge." Her hand twitched slightly, close to the concealed weapon. "You think you have me figured out? I think you've spent so long planning this moment that you've forgotten your original purpose. You wanted justice. Instead, you've become exactly what you claimed to hate, a manipulator of power for personal gain." The city lights sparkled below them as Maria processed his words, her carefully constructed mask slipping for just a moment. He pressed his advantage, knowing timing was crucial. "Your data dump won't bring justice. It'll create chaos. Thousands of innocent people will suffer when the system collapses. And for what? So you can replace one power structure with another? You're trying to manipulate me," she said, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "No, I'm offering you what you really wanted all those years ago, a chance to fix the system, not destroy it." He turned back to the view. Ricardo wasn't perfect. He built something flawed but necessary, a way to keep worse people in check. Your father never understood that. My father was an honorable man. Your father was a dreamer who couldn't accept reality. Ricardo offered him a place in the system, a chance to be part of the balance. He refused, tried to fight it, and destroyed himself in the process. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Just like you're about to do." Below them, the gala continued its glittering dance. Helena was speaking with a group of businessmen, Thompson hovering protectively nearby. Alexandra had positioned herself near the main data hub, ready for any contingency. "The files you found earlier?" he continued. "A test. I wanted to see if you'd recognize an amateur attempt at manipulation. You spent too long focusing on revenge to see the real opportunity here." Maria's expression shifted subtly. "What opportunity?" "To become the new keeper of the balance. Not as Ricardo's enemy, but as his successor, alongside his son." He turned to face her fully. "That's what this night is really about. A transfer of power, but not the kind you planned. You expect me to believe you'd share power with your father's enemy? I expect you to recognize a better Khan when you see one." He smiled, genuine this time. We're not so different, you and I. We both learned to play both sides, to understand the high and the low. That's what Ricardo was trying to teach me all along, and what your father never grasped. He withdrew a small device from his pocket, a quantum-encrypted drive. This contains everything. The real system, the true balance of power. Not just the compromising information, but the connections, the safeguards, the whole network Ricardo built, including parts even Helena doesn't know about. Maria's hand moved fractionally toward her weapon again, but he could see the calculation in her eyes. You have 3 choices, he continued. Release your data dump and watch the region descend into chaos. Try to kill me and trigger failsafes that will expose everything, including your own network. Or, he held out the drive, become part of something larger than revenge. Why would you trust me? Because Ricardo would have. He saw potential in your father, and he sees it in you. Through me, he stepped closer. The system needs both of us. Your determination to fight corruption, and my understanding of how to maintain balance. Together, we can make it work better than either of our fathers did. The moment stretched, taut with possibility. Below them, Helena watched while appearing not to, her face betraying nothing. Alexandra's team waited for signals that might never come. Finally, Maria reached for the drive. If this is a trick, it's not a trick. It's an inheritance for both of us. He released the drive into her hand. Check it. You'll see I'm telling the truth. She withdrew a sleek laptop from her clutch, far too easily for it to have been unplanned. The drive's contents appeared on the screen, and he watched her expression change as she realized the scope of what she was seeing. This is everything. The complete system, including improvements I've designed over the years without even knowing why. He gestured at the glittering city below. We can tear it all down tonight, or we can make it work the way it always should have. Maria's fingers flew over the keyboard, verifying, analyzing. He waited, knowing this moment would determine decades of future history. Your team has already disabled my failsafes, she said finally. It wasn't a question, just as you've already positioned backup systems we haven't found. We can keep playing this game, or we can do something neither of our fathers managed. She closed the laptop. Create a true balance. Single quotes below them. Helena smiled slightly, sensing the shift in the night's energy. Thompson began quietly directing security to stand down. Alexandra's team melted away into the shadows. Welcome to the family business, he said, offering his arm. Shall we go tell our mother the good news? Maria hesitated for just a moment before taking his arm. She's not my mother. No, he agreed as they walked toward the ballroom. But she's the keeper of secrets we both need to understand. And we have a lot to learn. The gala continued its glittering dance. The power brokers of South America, unaware that the game they'd been playing for decades had just changed fundamentally. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the delicate balance of power being reforged below. In the end, he thought, every great con contains a kernel of truth. And sometimes, the greatest truth is that what we think we want isn't what we really need. Maria had wanted revenge, but found purpose. He had wanted freedom, but found belonging. And somewhere, he liked to think. Ricardo Mendez was smiling at how his greatest con had finally played out, turning 2 lost children into the guardians of the legacy he'd spent his life building. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!